guest this morning, Natalie Sealy-Richardson, and it's all about Independence Day, Trinidad and Tobago style. What does independence mean to you? I know we love to dress up in our red, white, and black, but it's more than just wearing colors one day for the end, saying you're a proud Trinbagonian. As we continue talking about independence, we have Miss Sophia Cooper, Special Programs Coordinator, responsible for education and outreach of the Assembly Legislature. And we are going to talk about the Legislature, look at independence, what it means for us and for the Assembly. So stay tuned and be a part of this conversation as you listen in. And of course, if you have something to share, you can share your comments in our live chat this morning. Sophia, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you on with us, sharing information and letting us know what's happening, whether it's the Halloween tour or the primary school debate and whatever else interesting and exciting is coming up. And I must say, I love how the Assembly Legislature has become user-friendly, if I can say that, because, we know it's for the assemblymen and they sit and they debate and who walks out and who does what. But we have so much information coming to us now where we can understand, what this is all about. And it has become so accessible to us because now you have people, having a tour of the building, the assembly, hearing its history. Something so awesome. And our young children are getting this exposure. So good job to you and the team coming out of the legislature.
Thank you very much. And it is a team effort led by the presiding officer, Ms. Abby Taylor, the clerk of the assembly, who is the administrative head, and a dedicated core of people who tirelessly to ensure that we get information to the public in ways that are interactive and interesting.
Yes, and I really love, and it shows over the years the change. So kudos to all of you, Ms. Taylor and your team, the house clerk, everyone, and just continue representing, and you all are doing a marvelous job. And I know sometimes the people behind the scenes, often go unthought of because you are doing, but you see the others all the time. So I think it's so important to recognize you all and let you know we see you, we hear you, and thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about the legislature. I always say, it cannot be said too much because there's always somebody who will not hear the information then. So for those of you who may have heard it, it's just a recap for you. And for those who've never heard, you're in history class this morning. Let's talk a little bit about the Assembly, what it means to Tobago. And I want to start off because we're looking at the independence idea. And Trinidad and Tobago was not always together.
Correct. We did a special for the 60th anniversary that focused on independence from a Tobago perspective. And that was, we created content presented in a theatrical form, mapping Tobago's history within the context of Trinidad and Tobago. And that was with a couple hundred people, like about 600 people in Shaw Park. Now, why do I start at that point? We're talking about Tobago in the context of Trinidad and Tobago for independence. We're a unitary state. Looking at Tobago's history, we've always had a certain level of autonomy, at least for the last 200 years.
And I think I just want to pause here because I think a lot of persons don't know that because, you have the modern conversation about autonomy and you hear people talk about why does Tobago want that? But Tobago had it. It's not necessarily new. The form of it in the modern presence may have its changing, but at one time, Tobago ran itself.
And so there's an evolution of governance on the island. The first assembly was in 1768. Georgetown, that's Port Granby. Scarborough was made the town the year after in 1769. So a lot of times when we have schools and visiting groups, we go through this history as part of our tour. Imagine that it's a classroom on wheels, so to speak. And you mentioned our special, which is Night of Mystery, held on the Thursday, the beginning of the Easter weekend, right? People don't have to wake up the next day to go to school or to work, right? And so we're using all these tools to make sure that the history is shared. And so when you come to the building, you're coming to the oldest legislative building in the country.
Imagine.
And so when we talk about independence, we're talking about not just Trinidad and Tobago, from a very Trinidad-centric position, but which I think is what we've been seeing, because the seat of central government is on the island of Trinidad. And so sometimes we forget that there's a history for Tobago. And so when I'm doing tours, I tell people there are three histories. There's the history of Tobago, there's the history of Trinidad, and then there's the history of Trinidad and Tobago. And so if we look at that evolution in the context of independence, we see that, yes, there's a unitary state, but also we have a level of autonomy that resulted in things like the rainforest being the oldest legally protected reserve, specifically geared for conservation. And I know people used to say in the Western Hemisphere, so I'm here to tell you that on the UNESCO website, it says the oldest. So this island that you probably can't see from satellites, led the way in conservation before the world was going green. And this idea of the Sustainable Development Goals, fine. And sometimes we need to remember that even though we're a small island, we've been making impactful decisions and leading the way for a very long time.
That is so important. And, you know, for those who were not aware, yes, Tobago has its own history. And when we talk about autonomy, it doesn't mean that anyone is vexed with anybody, or, you know, we're looking, as I hear a lot of people talk about secession, what they want to do, and they can't do this and they can't do that. But we really have to understand where we came from as we chart the way forward. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's in, if I have my dates right, 1788 or 89 about, Tobago was joined to Trinidad, but Tobago still...
In the 1800s.
Right, yes. But Tobago still had its own method of system of taxation and governance, but I think it's in 1799 is
1899,
when... Right, 1899, where you had that official, we became a ward of Trinidad.
So this is where, again, we look at how to tailor the content. On some official websites, so I mean that this is information that is out there, but it's phrased a little funny. Because Tobago became a ward of the colony of Trinidad and Tobago. And what does that mean? The two islands were separated into administrative districts called wards. And so Trinidad had a number of wards, and the island of Tobago was considered a single ward. But it wasn't a case where Trinidad sort of adopted Tobago. It was the colony of Trinidad and Tobago. And so even in terms of saying the colony of Trinidad and Tobago, and recognizing that it's not like you're a ward of the state.
Where you have somebody who is making decisions
No,
for
it's
you.
not that. It's an administrative district. So in law, sometimes you see it on documents and so on, and that's what they mean. And so even re-educating people about certain words that we use in everyday language, and you know, just taking a step
and understanding the context.
And so again, the evolution of governance on the island is something to pay attention to, but always remembering that, yes, we've always had an element of self-governance. Not because, according to you, we vex with anybody. Right? I don't know if I have time to tell a quick story, just to sort of emphasize what this means.
Go right ahead.
So the book written by the wonderful Susan Craig James. The book called What Mean These Stones? There's a story on page 166, right, about Tobago and the legislature. There was this enslaved woman called Fanny, right, elderly woman, and she decided, listen, you're not supposed to send me in the field to work. Them hard work and saying,
past that.
So she went to the government office to complain on the plantation owner to say, this is not right. Remember, this is somebody who is enslaved. She went on a Thursday, which was the free day for people who are enslaved. That was market day. She made her report. Her boss find out, and he punished her. What? Who tell him to do that? Well, they stripped him of his post on the legislature. And they took away some of his other, you know, additions and so on. And again, that was done by the magistrate on the island of Tobago. Not in Britain. Not in Trinidad.
But right here.
And so even when we look at things like slavery, and we see that when we come to island governance, there are certain decisions that we've made for ourselves that reflect how we treat people.
Yes.
And so we have to also appreciate whether or not we know that we're good enough to make the decisions that we need to make.
Right,
And
yes.
not necessarily thinking, well, somebody else has to do it because we're too small.
Yes.
Or we're not good enough, or we
Yes.
don't have the information. The information is there.
Yes.
When you come to the Assembly Legislature on Jerningham Street in Scarborough,
Right, yes.
yes, we are going to be delighted to have you every single time.
Right. And that is so important, understanding, you know, who we are, what we can do, and our potential. And I want us briefly, because our time is running out, in terms of modern day, today, looking at the whole concept of autonomy, and though you would have touched on it, you know, what it means for Tobago in terms of the context of independent Trinidad and Tobago.
Right. So I want to start, when we talk about modern day, I want to start in 1980, where Act 37 was created.
Yes.
We had a chairman, we didn't have a chief secretary.
Yes.
The chairman was in charge of everything. So executive powers sort of had that person. Right.
Right.
Jumped to 1996, where we had some changes in the THA Act, Act 40. The thing is, although that act focused on separation of powers, which is a principle in the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, there were some changes that sort of also made administrative decisions also a bit difficult in some respects. There are 33 areas in the Act where the THA is responsible for those things. But in terms of administratively, there are some areas that are still gray. And so there is work to be done in terms of improving the letter of the law when it comes to the THA Act. And I know that there's some conversations now about what is on the table in terms of what Parliament is doing. So I would like to encourage people to pay attention. It doesn't mean that you have to be from Tobago, born in Tobago. Just have an eye out because you're concerned about what democracy looks like.
Exactly.
Right? From your own participation. And so that is relevant to everyone.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
So,
and I like how you interjected that with it's relevant for everyone, because a lot of persons, even from our sister isle, thinks it's a Tobago issue, but it's a Trinidad and Tobago issue.
And I know you said we do have a lot of time, but let me just give an example of what that looks like. Tobago has about 200 nautical miles on the northeast, if my reading of the map is correct. Right. So when Trinidad and Tobago were joined, it means that you're now talking about one body of water.
Yes.
Imagine a big circle around both islands.
Yes.
The thing is, those 200 nautical miles, where did they go? The THA Act gives 6 nautical miles to the THA.
Right.
So the other 194 went somewhere. It went under the central government. So even when we talk about what the union looks like, what democracy looks like, what the law looks like to ensure that democracy is preserved, we have to think in very logical and physical terms. Something as simple as access to resources.
Yes.
When the sea around us.
Right.
You know? So yeah, the rainforest, 1776, that was Tobago.
Right,
and those are the things that we should appreciate and again pay attention to when the conversation, you know, comes up in Parliament.
Yeah, and for me, you know, it's the little things sometimes pop out. So, you know, company registries has gone fully online and there's a cross system. And when you are registering now in that system as an individual, you have to put your address. If you live in Tobago, the options after you put your street address, it's a Scarborough, I think Canaan, I'm not sure if Crown Point is there. And there's a third option. And I don't live in any of those areas.
So you live on the
So I am like, okay,
somewhere.
what am I going to choose? But I look at the options. If I put a Trinidad address, you know, everywhere is Samoa, Laventille, San Fernando, Maribel.
So what happened with the rest of Tobago?
And so things like these are, you know, things like this pops out to me. Somebody sat in Trinidad and created this beautiful online system, but I cannot select correctly where I live. So I have to select Scarborough, and I don't live in Scarborough. That's not my mailing address. So I think, you know, even in that may seem simple to someone, but you can't overlook us like that here, because any little nook and cranny that's a neighborhood in Trinidad is there on the drop-down list. And Tobago just has 3, and I'm like, this is so incorrect. I'm forced to choose something, and that's not my legal address. But for me to complete the process, I have to select Scarborough. So don't come and look for me in Scarborough. I don't live Scarborough. All right. So Sophia, thank you so much for spending your time this morning with us. And really, viewers, we have to take it upon ourselves, you know, take the initiative to understand our history, Trinidad and Tobago. All right, Tobago, we're talking all things Tobago this morning. Understand who we are, where we need to go, and stand up for democracy. Because it's not just for us today, but for those who will come. Viewers, stay tuned, and we have one more guest coming up on the other side of the break, so don't you go anywhere.